more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA. And we are talking over the course of the next few weeks about an idea that I've been pondering myself in my life, which is about gratitude plus generosity brings abundance. And I think that those are major components to have an abundant life, a life that is fun and exciting and worth living. And the things that we talk about on Living Your Inspired Life, we talk about social conscious business, conscious environmental issues, and the people that are really making a difference in that area, and conscious evolution, how you can tune in and tune up and align yourself so that you can have a power perspective in your life that is focused and fun and compassionate and loving. So with all of that in mind, I have this most amazing guest joining me today who has been doing a lot of these things I just described out in the world already. And I just am thrilled to have him on and have this conversation. So I want to welcome onto the show Birju Pandya. Hi.
So grateful for this space, Susan. Thank you for having me.
I am so grateful, and I just want to share with the listeners how I found my way to you. And my way was through Nipun Mehta, who's I have heard speak a few times out here in the Ventura County area, and he's just inspired me with this idea of having kind of a generous, reciprocal way of being in life, and he connected me to you. So I'm excited to see what we're going to talk about.
As am I.
Okay, so I'm just going to let our audience I'm going to read your little short bio so people get an idea of what you're doing, and then I've got some questions for you. So Birju focuses on a connection or a connected series or group with dealing with money, social good, and inner transformation. And you are a managing director of Harmonia, or at least that's part of your bio, and which is a private equity firm specializing in impact investing using nature-based solutions. You've also been a longtime volunteer of Service Space, which I want to talk about today, which is a nonprofit that has been popularizing gift culture through numerous portals. And I want to talk about all these things, Birju. I want to talk about what a gift culture is first, because that feeds into generosity, yes?
Well, they certainly sound connected to me. And my own approach and connection with gift culture has been evolving as well. Of course, when I was a kid, I thought gift culture is underneath the Christmas tree.
Yeah, I get to get it, right?
And it's very much connected to receiving, more so than the act of giving. And the deeper I went into my own journey, a series of insights started to come up. Depending on what you're exposed to, there are folks who talk about monetary systems as we see them today being relatively new in the history of mankind.
And what do you mean by that, monetary systems? The way that the economy, the global economy, has been running up until now is fairly new?
I'm specifically referring to a transactional way of life.
Mm.
So I want something from you. I'm going to offer you something for me. We're going to call it a day at the end of that transaction, and no one's the wiser. And the way that we used to operate from a while back is acknowledging that we were all part of a family. So I wouldn't treat my mother, hopefully, in that same transactional relationship. If I went over to eat at her house for Thanksgiving, which I will be doing here, my response at the end of dinner is not, "Mom, how much do I owe you?"
Right.
And yet, this is how we treat 99% of our lives nowadays and assume that it's normal. So playing around with, well, what is normal exactly?
Well, and what I'm hearing you say is, as you were talking about the transactional thing, and and say, "Mom, what do I owe you?" My grandfather, he was not a victim. He was part of the Depression era, and so he would often talk about, going shopping or something like that. Is he's going to go trade, and he would go to trade his money for a bag of apples or something like that. But he definitely saw it as a circular thing, reciprocity. I'm going to give you something, you're going to give me something, and that's how the relationship works. And I will continue to trade at your store because you give me something that I enjoy, and I give you something that you enjoy. And that really was kind of how it used to be, yeah?
That's a facet of how it used to be. So if you imagine a continuum where the way that we tend to operate today follows, as close as I've seen, it follows a casino paradigm where the transaction is basically made off of betting for how one can end up with the highest return to oneself.
Oh, yeah.
And from there, we can move to a space of having it more of a commerce orientation where money is offered, but it's definitely not as a bet. It's more as a transaction to receive goods that are of appropriate value for what is offered. And then there's this space of barter or trade, which is, I think, what you're referring to, where there's an acknowledgement of a relationship, and that relationship is then able to be fostered through that bartering process. And I'm exploring another opportunity that pushes that spectrum even further, where there is no strings attached in the offering. Because sometimes when we offer to somebody, they might not be able to pay us back, but they can pay it forward.
Right.
And there's an implicit trust in recognizing that if we offer in such a context and people do pay it forward, everyone ends up better off. It's that idea of, imagine a circle of people where everyone is doing a back massage for the person in front of them. If they were just saying, "Look, give me my back massage back to me," you miss out on the entire circle.
Right. Well, so let's talk about that, because I know that there's service space and Nipun Mehta and all the stuff that you've been involved in. There's something called Karma Kitchen. Let's talk about that, because that to me describes this whole thing of paying it forward and without expectation of getting anything from it.
Sure. So Karma Kitchen, just as a bit of context here, this is a restaurant concept that was originally started in India and expanded over. It now operates in about a half dozen cities, including the Bay Area, Chicago, and D.C. And the concept is around offering a gift culture within a restaurant concept. So if you and I, Susan, were to go and eat there one afternoon, we would be served by volunteers who were present to grow in their own practice of generosity. We'd be served food that would be relatively local and trying to fit in values of giving. And at the end of our meal, the check would see zero at the top, and beneath the zero would be an articulation basically saying that this meal that we would have received was a gift. And it was offered by the person who sat before us at this table. And that person is not a wealthy individual or whatnot, at least in a financial sense. But they did feel a sense of abundance inside, and the gifts they received, they wanted to see paid forward. Now, the difficulty or the rub in that process is in recognizing that we can't pay that person back. They're already gone.
Right.
And what we have the opportunity to do now is to take that and to grow with it. How will we pay it forward? One way is to continue the cycle of giving through money. There are many other ways. People have offered their hands to wash dishes. People have said, "I'm going to go home and treat my family nicer for the next week." People have said, I want to read up on this and share it with my community. People have said, I'll do all of the above. And the value that's unlocked from simply offering that invitation, we have found, is more than what transactions can hold.
Yes.
So that's what's exciting about it. But as long as we think about things in a linear and financial wealth standpoint, we lose sight of these things.
You know, it's so interesting because I'm hearing a couple of things that you talked about just then. One is I'm curious, how were people receiving those gifts? Because it sounds like, because you said you take it in and people would think about, okay, how could I give now? So that sounds like that's a kind of a portal for supporting individuals in inner transformation, in really kind of stopping and saying, wow, I just had this experience, and now how do I feel about it, and how do I want to respond to it? Is that a lot of what was occurring in the Karma Kitchen?
Well, I love this phrase you used, inner transformation, Susan, and I really think that that's what it's about. The whole process is, from my estimation, an experiment in how we can all be better people. Not that we're all not good people to begin with, but there's always an edge that we can grow on. And I've seen that spectrum in this restaurant concept where some people come in and they feel the concept right away and they say, look, you know, the average meal that I would pay for at lunchtime would be $15. Well, I want to reward this act, and so I'm going to give $20. Some people would look at this concept and say, oh, my worldview is that I really need to figure out how to maximize what I can for me. And so if someone's going to say this is a gift, well, that's wonderful. I just received a free gift, and I'm going to offer nothing, and I'm going to go about my merry way and not really engage more deeply. And everything in between. We've had folks say, well, look, I don't have money. I have $1, but what I really have is a heart that wants to serve. And so I'm going to come up with other ways to pay this forward that are non-monetary. To us, the big opportunity is to say, look, you know, if there's a person out there who has a mindset that says, what can I get out of this situation? And we had this woman come in. She's a retiree. She came 6 times, and she offered nothing, not even at the level of intention. When we tried to explain the concept, she would hurry out before her check was given to her.
Oh, my.
And after 2 months of this, through the sheer act of offering love again and again and again, she actually offers $1. And she stays to explain the significance of that $1 and how her own behavior in her house, her family's behavior as a result, has transformed because of love, for lack of a better term.
Oh, my gosh, Birju, I'm getting chills as you say that. Wow.
I felt the same way when I experienced this. And at the end of the day now, we're supposed to look at that dollar and treat it as though it was just another dollar. And I would say that is absolutely not the case. We have to learn how to see that.
So you are a businessman. You've been in the business world and money transaction type world for a while. And as part of your bio, it talks about focusing on social good and inner transformation. And so as we're talking about this idea of the Karma Kitchen, I want to know from you how you see that moving out into those larger corporations that are in the world that are have really been about, you know, the buck and making the most. Because it seems, I just want to say, because it seems like, you know, I hear the buzz going around, and, you know, when you go out in the world of, you know, them that's got and us that don't, and the big government or the big corporations are heavy at the top taking all the money, and the little guys got nothing. So it's interesting, how does social good and inner transformation even crack into that kind of a paradigm?
Right. So I chuckle because I think about my own educational background. I have an MBA, which either means that I'm smart or dumb, depending on how you look at it. And the way that that I've been trained is very linear, and it's very focused on making execution work at the level of a business. What I'm confused by is value that goes well beyond what I can immediately capture or even what I can make tangible. So I'm forced to ask deeper questions of what is the value that I'm actually trying to create. If I may share one more example from Karma Kitchen as an example and then work backwards into business.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was a week early on in Karma Kitchen where a gentleman came in, and a friend of mine was the volunteer waiter that day, and at the end of the meal, when the check was received, this gentleman looked at the check quite puzzled. He'd never seen anything like that before, looked like a businessman himself. And he called my friend the waiter up. He said, "I don't get this, but it feels like you're basically doing an experiment of trust. Is that right?" And my friend said, "Yes, I think that's a pretty solid way to put it." So the gentleman reaches into his wallet and he pulls out $100. And he says, "Well, then I'm going to trust you to bring me the right change."
Oh.
And my friend takes this in his hand, and he's confused. He's a volunteer. His day job is a PhD student in Berkeley, and he's here to learn how to be generous. And so he goes into the back room, and he opens up the cash register, and there's a lot of thoughts running through a person's mind at that time. You can charge the same price that everybody else takes. You could give him a discount for practicing trust himself. You could make it free if you wanted to. And he decides to come back after reflecting on it for some time. And he says, "Sir, here's your change." And he gives him $120.
Oh, my.
And this gentleman, he just freaked out. Absolutely could not contain his joy. He decided to get up, and he hugged every single person in the restaurant. We have this phrase, the cup of gratitude that runs over.
Mm-hmm.
You fill that cup, and if it does run over, you get some really interesting responses. And I saw this, and I heard that story for the first time, and I just couldn't believe it, and I had goosebumps, and I said, "But that's not how you run a business. That's how you go bankrupt in 3 weeks."
Oh.
And my friend the waiter said, "Aha, Birju, we counted up the money at the end of that week, and there was more money in the chit than we had seen to that date."
Wow. Oh, my goodness. Now
And
I
I
have
am
chills.
forced to reimagine what I think of as business. What exactly am I looking to maximize, and how much can I trust? I'm sorry to interrupt. Susan.
No, that's good. So how much can we trust? I have an
Right.
issue with trust. I have to say, Birju, I have an issue with trust. And I think most of us do, the when you get knocked around in the world, it's a little bit challenging to reinvent that trust every morning when you wake up.
Right. And I would say that I'm in the same boat. I'm looking to grow in my trust. I'm looking to grow in my love, really, for all of humanity, who I would hope to consider to be my brothers and sisters. That's a really hard path. And so I'm not looking to walk around as a beggar tomorrow, because I feel like I don't have the strength inside to have cultivated that. So the question that I'm left with is, what is the elegant way to offer trust and build it in small bites from here to there? This is the experimentation that we've been doing at Service Space, and we've also been playing with those types of experiments at Harmonium, where we say, look, we can't just operate in a pure gift concept right now. So what we'll do is we'll be gifting our time. We will offer a moment of silence before we start our meeting. It's a minute. It's nothing in one context, and yet in another context, it creates space. And that space can be used to reflect, and that reflection can be used to change behavior. And we've seen that. In our office, we've seen a shift in the types of investments that we wish to make. We've seen a shift in the types of behaviors we wish to engage in. And it all started because we wanted to take a minute of silence before our meetings. You think about how small things lead to big shifts over time, and that's really, to me, the big opportunity that gift approaches provide, where you don't have to give away everything tomorrow. You don't have to have that level of trust.
It sounds like what your kind of mission, if you will, is to create that bridge from the linear monetary transactional business paradigm to that place where there's I was going to say a hell of a lot more generosity out in the world.
I'm very open to exploring what that means, and I know that if we're really going to try to share that with the world, we've got to start walking it ourselves. And to me, that's where the karma kitchens of the world start to come in. And I start to look at my own behaviors, and I say, well, how do I start shifting myself? How do I shift my approaches to consumption, my approaches to relationships? What do I really want out of my life? What are the stories I've been telling myself? And these are things that go well beyond what we would traditionally call an investment approach. And yet, if we don't start addressing that, then the game stays the same. And the question is, do we need the game to stay the same at this point of where we are as a civilization?
Well, I can definitely, at least from my point of view, if the game stays the same, we are not going to be good. I mean, it's already hugely uncomfortable how unbalanced the world has become because of this linear practice.
Absolutely. And yet, when I see people willing to take on these types of small activities, the kinds of shifts that I've seen happen, not only within myself, one of my colleagues decided, our entire office decided that one of the things we wanted to do was to take on a 21-day kindness challenge within our investment office. These are hardcore financial people who said, I want to do one act of kindness every day for 3 weeks. That's how you build a habit, I hear.
Yes.
And so we start out thinking, well, what good is this? We have very important things to do. We've got a lot of money that needs to be allocated in different places. This is something that takes up mind share. Well, one day, one of my colleagues is coming back from work, and in buying her train ticket, she gets 3 extra silver dollars of change. And rather than operating from a space of day-to-day life where she would have just put that in her pocket and started moving on, she had this permission to experience a different approach. And she said, well, how can I practice generosity with these 3 silver dollars? She ends up gifting them in various contexts. One is to somebody who needs it in the train station. One she actually gives to a family member, a grandmother. And very interestingly, she could not have planned this to happen, and this is where stories are really interesting. Within a week, she happened to find 3 silver dollars just lying around on the street. The same 3 that she gave away came right back to her, except that the act of giving it away totally changed the relationship that she had with her grandmother, who couldn't understand and believe how some of the small meanings that were caught up in their relationship were able to be spoken to through the act of generosity that she offered, which I won't go too far into, but it definitely shifted their relationship. It built up the possibility of a business relationship through the act of describing what had gone on. And at the end of the day, she ended up with the same amount of money anyways, with all this extra value. So we're sitting here asking ourselves this question of, well, how do we start to figure out how to trust in this way? How do we grow in this process? And it's been very exciting to experiment.
I have a phrase that I'd like to say when I'm talking to clients and students is, as I give, I do receive. And that's kind of the law of circulation or karma. The cause and effect will always come back to us in whatever way it was intended when we put it out there. So if we are putting out kindness, loving kindness and compassion, that's going to go out and then come back to us either returned equally or multiplied.
Well, I don't necessarily have a mind that's able to comprehend all the complexity that's out there, so I try to make it simple for myself. And one of the things I've been studying recently out of interest is ecology.
Yes.
So if we start with a small garden plot, let's say it's 20 feet by 20 feet, and we destroy the soil in the garden plot, every year we're still going to be able to grow food on it until we don't have soil anymore, and then we can't grow food. And if I were to look at that in year 2 and the soil runs out in year 10, and I would say, well, I'm fine. I still have food, so no issues. I can do whatever I want. It's denying the inevitable. And if on year 2 I decide to build soil and I give up a little bit of food this year in order to do it, but I never run out, in fact, I always get more and more soil, that makes a huge difference. To me, that's a very simplified version of what we're living. We're in a massive garden, and we choose to either build soil or destroy it.
I love that analogy. That's a fabulous analogy. So, Birju, let's talk a little bit more about, there's something in all the research I was doing about what you've been up to in life, and there's this idea of non-material growth. Because I think a lot of, in the business world, and certainly, lots of small business entrepreneurs, you have to do your business plan and figure out how the company's going to grow over the course of a few years and things like that. And it's always based on the monetary value. And this idea of that there's also a place where you can plant into your business a value system that reflects the non-material growth, because that also occurs. I think we've become so, I want to say narrow-minded. That's not exactly the right phrase, but focused on the bottom line, right? At the end of the day, this is the money I go home with, that we aren't even paying attention to all the other components that happen in the day of a life of a business person, where there is that heart-to-heart connection with customers and or personal growth because of whatever experience happened with a customer in your business. So can you speak a little bit about that idea of non-material growth? It seems like it's a good value system to put attention on.
Sure. I have a short story that comes to mind. I'm sure you must have heard this saying that at the end of the day, we spend so much of our time earning as much money as we can to buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like.
Oh yeah.
So that's an interesting insight to me if we were to take it seriously. So what exactly do I need? What am I looking for in my life? Do I define myself as a consumer? And I found that as I've been reflecting with people in my circles, we're finding we don't see ourselves as such. We need some basic things like food and shelter, but what is enough as far as the shelter is concerned? Mm-hmm. So as we sit with that, we're all asking ourselves, well, what do I really want to grow in? I want to grow in fun. I want to grow in health. I want to grow in happiness. I want to grow in family. Right? There's a whole lot of different ways to think about growth beyond financial. And the beautiful thing about growing in fun and happiness is that it's not a zero-sum game. If I'm smiling, it doesn't mean that you must now frown.
Oh,
but if I
you.
only have $10, then we have to decide how to split that $10. It's not win-win, especially when we start looking at the monetary system itself. In fact, my understanding of the monetary system is that not only is it not win-win, it's lose-lose.
Yeah.
In that the system itself demands extraction. At some point, we need to cut down more and more trees in order to keep going the scheme that we have in place today. That's a problem. Eventually, we're going to run out of trees in our garden, and that eventuality is not that far off. So we're left wondering, is it really worth it? All of this growth that we're seeking financially, is it really worth it? Or is there another way to get the things that I really want, the happiness, the connection, the brotherhood, whatever you want to call it? That's where non-financial wealth comes in. When I think about the kind of wealth that I've experienced just myself in terms of being exposed to these ideas, being connected to people who share that viewpoint and don't want to define themselves by what they have and what they consume and separate themselves through that process, I feel so interconnected. I felt so interconnected that I walked up to my boss last year and I said, I really want a pay cut because I'm so grateful that he looked at me like I was a crazy person. And then we started talking about it. And I said, well, I think that if there's less money spent on me, then more people can come in and experience this beautiful thing. And in the meantime, I actually feel very well taken care of because I've discovered wealth that's non-financial. I want to offer that to other people. I want to live it myself. To me, that's a pioneering attitude. Who's out there who's willing to say, I don't buy into the old story anymore. This whole money matters thing, don't care. And I need to start to accept what that means to actually walk in that direction.
You're causing me to tear up as you describe this, Birju, because it's I think it is the way of how humanity is going to move beyond where we are now and really begin to give back to the environment and to each other. I have to share with you, I was having a conversation with my son earlier. He's going to a 2-year college, and it's going to be 3 years soon, and maybe 4, who knows. And it's time to sign up for classes. And he was saying, "Mom, I don't get it. Why am I going to college? Because really, I don't. All I want to do is go out, make enough money so I can live my life." And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute. He's kind of he hasn't quite found where he's going." And he thinks that he has to have money in order to go there, and he doesn't understand that the process he's in now is the thing that's going to grow him and inform him of where he's going. You see what I'm saying? So what kind of advice would you give to young people right now?
My sense is that we are in a time of transition and a time of uncertainty. And I think in those types of periods, there's a lot of fear. I know, just speaking for myself, there's a lot of fear.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen to my life. I don't know if the stories that I grew up telling myself and the expectations that I had created for myself will come to pass. And I don't even know that if they don't come to pass, that it's my fault, that I didn't work hard enough, or all of these things that we have been grown up being told. And to what extent can we as a group start to sit in a circle and analyze that and say, so what do we really want? Maybe your son does need to go to school and placate that collective questioning sensation that those around him have. I also know of plenty of folks who've decided that, well, what they want to do is engage in a gift-based culture. And that means that there's some consequences that come from that action, and they have to be ready to step into that at this transitionary phase. But there are intentional communities out there that are looking to live in this sort of way. It's what we would call fringe today, and yet the eventuality is, well, the system we have in place isn't really going to work, so we need some people that will pioneer and be true leaders.
Well, I appreciate you being a pioneer, Birju. Thank you. So tell me then, okay, when you said engage in gift-based cultures and there's some fallout from that, what would be some of those fallouts as we encourage people to step into that?
My sense of the fallout is, there's a former monk. His name is Satish Kumar. He runs a magazine called Resurgence, and he describes the idea of wealth generation as threefold. He says we need to regenerate our wealth in soil, in soul, and in society. And this is a very powerful concept to me because these are the three areas that we have degenerated our wealth in. We've lost our sense of community.
Yeah.
We've certainly been doing our best to destroy our soils. And the concept of soul regeneration, I mean, that sounds pretty out there to begin with, and yet how interconnected are we within ourselves? How much time do we have to do any self-reflection or, God forbid, prayer, things that would allow us to look inward? Nowadays, I think that time is of the essence. We don't necessarily have that. So while we are regenerating these aspects of ourselves, there's a lot to be gone through. One of my friends, he's a part of an intentional community here in Oakland. He's basically operating from a gift space. He has a beautiful garden in the backyard where he grows most of his own food with his community, and he offers the surplus to others. Through that process, he's built a vibrant community of people in the neighborhood who want to support what he's up to. And one day he wakes up with a toothache, and he finds that he actually needs to have his wisdom tooth removed. And he's looking around and he says, well, I don't have a dentist in my community, and I don't have the money to pay for a dentist. What do I do? And in that particular case, when he shared it with his neighborhood, one of the neighborhood members said, I actually have an existing relationship, and if I explain this particular circumstance, I'm sure that this dentist would be able to help. And he did. But it's very much coming from a space that is not what we're used to coming from, and this is part of the difficulty. We're walking right in the direction of not knowing.
Right.
I'm not saying everyone's got to go live in an intentional community tomorrow. I think there's a huge spectrum. But I do believe that as time goes on, relationships is where our real wealth will be found.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And in fact, I think that that's the place where the wealth is, and that's the place where our personal growth is in relationship to others, and therefore
Right.
also in relationship to ourselves.
Right.
And I think that we've become so busy as a culture in racing around and getting and accumulating and all of those things that our connection within ourselves has certainly been depleted, if it's even been established, you know?
Indeed. I feel like when we think about those interconnections that are being frayed by the dominant paradigm that we're a part of, the questions that I find myself sitting with is, how do we start at the edges, starting to regenerate from within the systems that we're in? Right? Do we have
That's
to
a
go
great
live in
question.
an intentional community to start building community? I would say no. We can do that tomorrow. You can go to a business tomorrow, in your own workplace, and stand up and say, I really believe a 21-day kindness challenge is really important. And it takes a lot of strength to say that. I think everyone who would hear that knows that it's not an easy thing to do. And yet, if it takes 2 minutes a day, why would we really say no?
Right. That, I'm trying, the communities that I'm involved in, that if I were to stand up and say that, they go, okay, let's start. But I know that there's many I was having a conversation with my parents, and they're very old school, and it just, it's almost like there's no neurosynapses that have been developed in their brains to comprehend what that means, to just give and be generous and not expect anything back.
Right. And this is part of our whole journey as a society that I'm trying to feel into. That if we all hold to this idea that transaction-based approaches are okay, the systems that we have in place are okay, they're actually helpful, and we're on our way to utopia, we're going to end up in a situation that's pretty tough. And as somebody who's working in the business world trying to invest in climate change mitigation and soil remediation, and I'm asking all of these questions of saying, well, is there enough money that we could pour into these solutions that would actually change the outcome fast enough? The place where I've arrived at internally is, without looking inside first, the speed at which capital runs is not as fast as the speed at which personal authenticity can go.
Oh, I love that you said that, because I think the majority of people think it's the reverse. That the inner work and inner transformation takes eons, but the capitalism, or if you will, that whole economy thing is on track and it's running like clockwork. I don't agree with that, but so I love that your suggestion that the inner transformation, the connecting within and being clear and authentic with yourself and then with others, is something that can happen at a faster rate and then create ripples into new paradigm, pioneering, as you've been saying, into new paradigms that will sustain the planet and grow humanity's awareness of itself.
I love that articulation, and Susan, I realize that what I'm saying is in many ways heretical. Our dominant religion of the day is capitalism, and we tend to have a binary mindset. So if not capitalism, we know the alternative, and we don't want that. And I'm saying, actually, there's other ways. I'm saying that the way we've been taught to believe our whole lives has separated things out. And I'm I'm of the mindset that authenticity is the new scale. You ever wonder why when you go to a doctor, they're usually unhealthy and they're telling you how to be healthy? And I see this in all walks of life.
Yeah.
We've somehow bought into René Descartes' view of the world being a watch, and we can take it apart and we can understand it and put it back together, and it's not like that. The world is deeply interconnected.
Yes.
From a space of interconnection, it's going to be authenticity that drives change. It's just that it's going to be tough to measure, and it's going to be very nonlinear.
Yeah, it's almost explosive in the way that it could happen. When you were saying very interconnected, I was seeing this Indra's net. Do you know what that is?
I've heard the concept, but would love to hear more.
I have a friend who knows all about mythology and I don't know whatnot. And she's always talking about Indra's net, which is this, there was some woman named Indra, I guess, and she cast out a net into the universe that was all this webbing, and at every point of connection of the threads, there was a jewel. And each multicolored jewels. And so when you think about that net, every point of connection is a jewel that just sparkles and shines and holds the connection stronger. And so it's almost like what you're describing to me is that kind of a now do I sound like a fringe person? Boy, but it almost is like that's what's being wrapped around the world, is this, especially with the internet and the way we can certainly know about people that we will never meet face to face. There is that net that is that jewel of connection at every place where we meet, whether we know the person on the other side of the planet or not. And that, to me, that's the image I keep visualizing within myself when I do my inner work, is seeing that interconnection and how what I do, no matter what, and what I think and how I act in my life will absolutely affect someone else that I will never meet.
Right.
Which sounds to me part of what you're talking about with the gifting culture, or the idea of being generous and kind, regardless, having that be your place of authenticity.
Well, absolutely. I feel like what's the direction of practicing, there's many reasons with which to practice. I mean, somebody could read into this a very spiritual approach of thinking about the value that comes in, beyond the gates of this life. And I would say, going back to this garden analogy, I don't need to go that far. I'm personally not convinced that there is anything beyond this life, and yet still, I want to take care of my garden. I think there's value in doing that, and I also find that there is joy in taking care of my garden. Holding on to my consumer mindset is actually harmful to me, so why would I want to engage in it?
Wow, that's amazing. That's awesome that you see that you can, that I'm just saying, holding on to my consumer mindset is harmful. It's interesting with the holidays coming up, and everybody's, there's ads everywhere, or television, magazines, newspapers, whatever. And I've been sitting with this idea, very much what we're talking about, of what is it that I really want to give this year? What is it that I want to give? I don't want to go buy something so I can give it. What is it that I want to give? And I haven't come up with the answer yet, but I do know the big component behind it is love.
Right. The way that I've been thinking about this, there's like 3 or 4 different categories of action that make things that sound impossible and fringe become very ordinary very quickly. One of which is a practice of generosity. Mm-hmm. So the giving part of a gift and finding that it is in the giving that the receiving exists, and to actually experience that. The second of which is some aspect of reflection, self-reflection, group reflection, to actually look at behaviors and see, are they aligned with the value sets that I purport to hold? And the third is some aspect of awareness building, just asking questions. Do I understand the system as it's set up? We're all part of this way of living right now, which is very hierarchical in nature. So those at the top are supposed to be able to have full sight on what's going on, and yet more often than not, they don't, because they can't. It's too complex of a system. And so we end up having all of these negative externalities, like wars and floods, for instance. So how do we start to question that and understand why is it that these things are even happening? And the way that leads to the rubber hits the road, these can be taken as deep platitudes, and yet 1 week ago, last Friday, I attended a wedding of a dear friend of mine, and the way that she and her now husband decided to take this wedding on, they had a short ceremony, about an hour or two long, a lunch right after that. Afterwards, they had a 60-minute session of group silence. Everyone sat in silence in a circle. And then everyone went around and shared their wishes.
Oh, my goodness.
They shared reflections around a candlelight. And at the end of that evening, there was not a dance. There was not consumption orientation. There wasn't a massive gift counter in the corner. And you can imagine the number of stories that this breaks in people's heads.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult for somebody to accept those kinds of stories being crashed to the ground. And yet she was so happy on that day. I can't even put in words how happy she was, how happy we all were to be able to connect in a way that moves us and lets us see the real wealth that we have.
Yes. That's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk just a little bit more about service space, because I want to invite our listeners here on Living Your Inspired Life to check out all that servicespace.org is doing, because it is this vehicle where people can begin to practice these places of giving of their time and energy. So I just want to read part of what I got off the website. Service Space says, we aim to create a shift from consumption to contribution, from transaction to trust, scarcity to abundance, and isolation to community. We believe in the inherent generosity of others and aim to ignite that spirit of service. We focus on small acts with great love that create positive ripples in the world. And this last thing I'm going to say is what gets me. Service doesn't start when you have something to give. It blossoms when you have nothing left to take. And I love that. So some of the things that that I saw on Service Spaces is thedailygood.org, where people can sign up and receive positive news, life-inspiring articles that you can contemplate during the day. After I signed up for it, and it's been great because I don't listen to any of the news that a majority of the world listens to. I choose not to on a regular basis because it just kind of destroys my human spirit. But this dailygood.org, there's inspirational articles that I can think about and go, oh, yeah, that makes me want to show up more authentically and more myself in the world. But there's also some other things that Service Space is doing, right, Birju?
Absolutely. There's about a dozen projects that are being taken on in a variety of places across the world. You mentioned Daily Good, Karma Kitchen's another one. There's even projects that are relatively small in nature, and yet the capacity of shift is so strong. Now, there's a gentleman in Ahmedabad, which is a city in India. He's a rickshaw driver, and he decided that he wanted to offer his rickshaw on a gift basis. Now, this is a gentleman who makes somewhere between $1 and $2 a day, I believe, or maybe it's like $3 a day, but somewhere in that range.
Wow.
So he's not a person who has a high margin, shall we say, and he was just touched by this. He's touched by the approach of gift, and he's part of a community of individuals who have been vilified in his country because everyone believes that they take advantage. If you try to get a rickshaw ride or a cab ride in India, you'll most likely be charged more than what the quote-unquote fair value would be. And the reason is that we can afford it and they can't, and they need to take advantage of the situation to do so. In many ways, it's human nature. And so he says, well, I want to help change that perception. So if you go in his rickshaw, you will see this beautiful placard in the back that explains the concept of what it means to receive something with no strings attached. There's all kinds of inspirational reading content in the back seat there. There's a guest book that's a part of it. And at the end of that ride, there's no check, there's no credit card, receipt holder, nothing. You just offer what you want, leave it in the pad in the back, and leave.
Oh, my God.
And if you talk to this gentleman about it, his name is Uday Bhai. Bhai means brother in Gujarati, which is where he's based. He will say, well, I make just about what I used to make in terms of dollars. So that's great. That ledger fits in. Now let me show you this other ledger, which is the guest book. And the kinds of things that you see in this guest book, I mean, he sees a dozen plus people a day minimum, and you see tear stains on this guest book.
Oh, my
People
goodness.
say, I did not know that human beings acted this way. The story in my mind is your kind of people take advantage of me, and look at this.
Oh, my goodness. And that's one individual just turning around a perception to make it that I can just feel ripples coming off of that.
Absolutely.
That's very inspiring. And I don't know, I wonder how many people here in America would be willing to do that.
Well, interestingly enough, there is a gift economy taxi cab running around in the East Coast.
There is?
Indeed.
Oh, wow.
It's part-time, but people have been inspired. This question is, well, what is the edge of one's own trust? Not saying operate like this every day, all day, and yet we all have edges where we can grow in our capacity to trust and practice generosity.
I'm writing down all these questions you keep asking because I want to contemplate these things you've been asking during the course of our conversation. How will we pay it forward? And what is the value that I am trying to create? And then what you just said, what is the edge of trust? I love that I want to develop.
Right. When we take on this 21-day kindness challenge in the office, there's some of the responses that I receive sometimes, well, I don't need to do this. I'm already kind. And there's this question, what would I ask the Dalai Lama? Well, I would ask the Dalai Lama or Billy Graham or whoever you put in front of me, will you please sign up for the 21-day challenge? Because everyone can grow in their generosity. It's just a different edge.
So, Birju, explain to my listeners what that 21-day challenge practice looks like specifically.
Sure. So the idea is to have a few creative constraints around the challenge itself, because the idea is to grow in generosity, not simply to practice what we've already been doing for the longest time. And so there's a few specific points. One is to have a new act every day. You can't do the same thing twice over those 21 days.
Oh boy, that is challenging already. My mind is like going, whoa.
Exactly. And kindness is a muscle. Attention is a muscle. All of these things that exist in the mind, they exist because of those neural pathways, and we need to build them. The second creative constraint is doing something that is above and beyond our everyday approach. Doesn't have to be large, can be small, but it has to be above and beyond.
What do you mean, as opposed to just giving $1 to somebody on the street?
It could be a dollar on somebody on the street. If you don't give $1 normally, that's above and beyond what you normally do.
Oh, okay.
Or I've had people say, what I'm going to do is make eye contact with homeless people on the street.
Yeah.
Or I've had people say, I'm going to share a space of love and intention with homeless people on the street. We can go really subtle on this stuff, and yet all of it is above and beyond.
I have a friend who, talking about this briefly, she decided years ago because of some family issues where there was somebody in her home or in her family that was homeless. She decided that she would meet each homeless person she came across and just ask them, "How are you doing? And I really want to know." And she would sit and listen for at least 5 to 15 minutes and look them in the eye and just love them up. And then, she said at the end of every conversation, she felt really good and she could see that they felt good because they'd been seen and heard.
It's beautiful. And I'm familiar with this, that the deepest need that we all seem to have is to be seen.
Yes, and to be loved. Birju, we're coming to the end of our time. How fast was that?
Thank you for the space.
Thank you for the space yourself. So I've been talking to Birju Pandya. Is there a website or something that I could drive people to explore more besides servicespace.org? Anything else you want to put out there?
I would say Service Space is a great place to get started in this whole process. And if you're interested in the 21-day kindness challenge or kindness in general, kindspring.org as well.
kindspring.org. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking about generosity. And I just feel so open-hearted having had this conversation with you. So I'm just going to end it by saying, and so it is, namaste.